In the last couple of videos, we've been concentrating on using purely primary colors. And that's been a real discipline, and that on my part, that was deliberate, because it's very important for us to strip things back right to the basics of primary colors in order to be able to understand warm and cold and saturated, desaturated. And we go back each time to the primaries in order to mix the colors we need. So that's the reasoning behind that. What I want to do now is, if you like, take the chains off a little bit and loosen things up, and let's look at other colors, because we know in reality that when we're painting, we're not most of the time just going to be using primary colors. So, the exercises are one thing, the reality is another. Now, if we have a palette here, we buy these palettes, all of these colors in it, obviously, and there's oranges and greens and blues and all sorts of things going on. And we have access to this. We don't actually need all of them, really, but to have them there's a reason, and I'm going to talk about that. I think what I'm saying is, to have a palette full of colors, and some palettes have even more colors, sometimes what it does is make us assume that there's a magic color here for everything we need. And when we're painting a landscape, for instance, or whatever, we go, yeah, we need some green. I'll have that green there because that green is... And we think that it's already done almost, and it tends to make us a wee bit shy from mixing too much. And the more colors we buy, the more we become like that. And in that way, we find it actually more difficult to make subtle colors, because to make really subtle colors, you're probably not going to be able to buy them, and the world in reality is full of subtle colors. So keep the balance between having, yes, a range of colors, and there's reasons, but thinking you can buy your way out of mixing color. Okay, so it's just a little reminder of that end of things. But we are going to open up a little bit here and begin to think about other colors on the palette. Before I do that, what I want to remind you of is something that, when we're talking about this business of, we're looking at something and we're deciding what color is that. I just realized I have an apple here. Forgive me, it's been around the studio. I've been painting and drawing it, and it's really withered, okay? So apologies. But, so we, just a refresher of what we've done in the last couple of videos. We look at an object and say, okay, where's our starting color? Where do we start with on the wheel? So we move it around, and you can see where I'm going there, And then once we get that, we look at the value, the brightness, we've talked about that. And then we look at temperature. When I mean temperature, and this is what I want to clarify, if I'm saying I want to start with red, because an apple's somewhere red, so let's start there. What I mean is, that question of temperature means, which way am I going to move that way around the clock? Do I think the red is more on the orange end, towards that segment, or towards the violet, or, end that segment? So we move within a zone. We're not necessarily leaping right across the blue necessarily right away. Some people add too much of one thing or another. If you have an object that is one color pretty much, most of all the way across it, then the chances are that the colors in your palette will be somewhere in that segment that hopefully you can see with my fingers there, from orange to red, violet, that sort of segment. Or if it was an orange, it might be that. If it was a landscape, it might be that. So get yourself a segment, is what I'm saying. So yes, start off with a starting color. But what I'm saying is, look at whether or not you need to push it that way. If you need to push it that way, you're adding a little bit of yellow. If you need to push it that way, you're adding a little tiny bit of blue, and so on. And that's what we mean by when we're adjusting temperature. Some people assume that, immediately it means throwing in loads of blue or loads of red or something. In this case, because we've got red, the only way it can go is that way or that way, which means it's yellow that we're pulling it towards. That's the other primary color. If I had a yellow object, it would either have to be pushed around. There might be parts of it coming around towards red or towards blue, And if it was a blue object, it was either going to come around towards the greens and yellows, or to the other end, which is the red. So just a reminder on that one. Anyway, what we're going to talk about now is earth colors and browns, that sometimes call them browns, okay? And again, on the palette, very often we have all these browns. And again, when we're looking for a brown in a landscape or in a still life or something, we search around our palette, to find the brown that's in there. And sometimes I think the term browns is not a good one, and even the term earth colors isn't necessarily a good one, because we assume then that they're colors that we use for earth things like landscape, and we overplay them again. If we just think of colors as being something that has qualities of temperature and saturation and brightness, then use those words, because sometimes the minute you give a color a name, you get obsessed about, oh, it's brown. Brown's good for trees. Brown's good for whatever, which it isn't, because a tree isn't brown most of the time. So what I've done here, I've put out 3 key earth colors, or we'll call them browns, whatever. And the first one here is burnt sienna. The second one is yellow ochre. The third one is burnt umber. Okay. And I want you to think of these, I'll move this out of the way for a second, as primary colors. So we have a burnt sienna there. Just grab a towel here, and we will put on our yellow ochre there, a little bit thinner so it's more vibrant, okay? And we will put in our burnt umber there. Again, thin it down to get a wee bit more life in it there, look. So think of these as primary colors: red, yellow, blue. And I know it's harder with the burnt sienna to see it as blue, but it's cold. Do you see how it's much colder brown earth than these? So it will represent the blue end of things. Now, we do have raw umber, and raw umber in a way is even more neutral, but the only problem I find with raw umber is it's leaning towards green, and it's just a wee bit too far over to the green end. So I tend to see burnt umber as representing the blue of my earth primaries, if that makes sense. So we're red, yellow, blue. So it makes sense then that these are also desaturated colors. They're not pure colors, because if I was to take, if I just put a little bit of red, that's, I think, a cadmium red there. That's red. That's a saturated, rich red. You can see the difference there. If I take a little bit of yellow, and just reach over here and put that on, you can see that yellow ochre is a drained out yellow. And I'll just take, obviously, a blue there. And of course, that's very clear to see that, that the umber is a muddy color. So all those 3 colors we started with there are muddy, desaturated colors. So let's assume that we look at an object and we say, what do we got to do? What is it? Is it blue? Might be a blue object. Let's say, again, I have reach over here a little tub of paint. So we might look at this and say, yeah, it's blue. There's my starting color. And then we might say, is it lighter or darker, of course? And then we'll say, the temperature, is it a purpley blue, or is it a, which way is it going in terms of, is it bluish purple, or is it a greeny blue, on the color wheel? And then, is it saturated? Is it rich or desaturated? Well, in most cases, most things in the world are desaturated. There's very little color that looks like that in the world. So if we focus on saturation and temperature, if we think about it, normally what we'd do is in the previous videos, what we've done is, first of all, we'll adjust the temperature. So we'll make our blue warmer or colder, more purple or more green. And then when we get happier with that, we'll desaturate it using a complementary. But another way, of course, to do this is to use our earth colors. Now it's not exactly the same, by the way, but it's an interesting one that you can employ. So what I want to do here is I'm going to take my palette. I'm going to use the blue as our theme, you know, and see how that goes. So I'm going to put some strong ultramarine blue on there, okay? And I know we've already got some on our palette, but I'll just put another one on there. So there's our ultramarine blue there. And into that, what I'm going to add is a little piece of my burnt sienna, a little tip of my burnt sienna, not too much, just a wee bit there. And I want you to see what happens to that now. And we'll have a look at that. Okay, you can see that we've made, you know, a grey. Okay. So what we'll do is we'll move on. I'll not talk about that much just yet, but that's one thing we've got. What we'll do now is move on and do the same again. We're going to work through those earth colours. This time, another patch of ultramarine. Clean up the brush. This time we're going to add a little bit of yellow ochre to it. Drop it in. And just you can see the change there. That's why I'm leaving that a little bit. And we'll just put that down below that one, okay? So that's that. Rinse the brush, clean up. And we'll do it one more time with our burnt umber. So we get our ultramarine over. This time maybe a little bit more. Rinse. And pick up our bit of burnt sienna. Put a wee bit too much on. I just want to drop to change it there, okay? And we'll throw that in here, okay? If we get enough of it. And what I'd like you to notice, and it depends on the water. Obviously, we vary the amount of water. They're going to get lighter and darker, so I haven't concerned about that. But what I want you to notice is this, that when we added burnt sienna, we've got, of the three here, the warmest, and maybe what we could say is going slightly towards violet. You know, it's that slightly purpley end of the spectrum, if you like. Clearly, when we go to this one, when we add a yellow ochre, it's going towards a greeny tint, greeny edge. And then when we add our burnt umber, you can see that's gone colder again to what we might see as a bluer tone. And we've got three different earth colours. In other words, with the addition of one colour, we have not only changed the temperature, but also the saturation. In other words, when I dip the burnt sienna into that blue, it was the equivalent to adding red, because it's a reddish earth, but also because it's a desaturated colour, it also drained it out. So we now have what we would have in a similar way that had we have added red and then desaturated. So in one go, we create a warmer or redder, purpley, I should say, desaturated, because, you know, red's going into blue, so it's purple. Yellow and blue makes green. And this that we call blue, I'm calling blue, and blue will make a much colder, straightforward grey, very neutral. So, you know, I know it can be difficult to see, but hopefully you see there are three very clear differences in the qualities of these colours. So what I'm saying is you can, to some extent, in one go, both change the temperature and the saturation of a colour by use of earth colours. And that's why earth colours are useful, and not necessarily all the time they have to be used as things in themselves. You know, they're there for a reason to adjust other colours, not just to say, oh, I want brown for a tree and I want yellow ochre for a field or something like that. And you can see there that depending on the amount that I use, I'm just cleaning the palette here, you know, depending on the amount of each colour. So let's just, you know, and this is critical. You know, these are why these exercises are interesting to do. Let's take that red, or that blue again, and let's just put in let's put in more. You know, I'll just use as much as I can here of the red and see how that becomes a little bit warmer again, because we've tipped the balance towards the reddish end, so it's not as blue cold. It's got a wee bit more warmth in that color and that tone and that, simply because I've poured more of that in. And the same thing applies, of course, if I did the same with my yellow ochre. I will move the blue to green and desaturate it all in one go. So this time I'll really put a bit more ochre in there, and obviously I'll tilt that more, incline that towards the yellow end of green. Hopefully it should be anyway. You can see there how much that has warmed the green because of increased the amount of yellow ochre, but it's still desaturated. It's still drained out. I suppose since we're doing it, we might as well try and do the same thing with the last colour, or burnt umber. Get our blue on there, rinse that, and try to get lots of the burnt umber in there. In other words, it's more burnt umber than maybe blue actually, but we'll put that in. Look at that. You can see obviously it's a bit deeper. So, you know, you could go on like that, doing lots of variations of that, but essentially what you can see is one that's got a wee bit of purpley warmth violet in, one that's clearly green, and one here that's colder. But obviously if we tip the balance, more of the brown, more of the earth, and less of the blue, you can see that will go more towards that. Eventually it'll transition to be more that side. So getting the balance right. But what I'm saying is there is a way that if you look at a color and you say it should be warmer, and it should, you know, it's a wee bit more green and it's desaturated, instead of doing it in two steps, then you think, well, I'll use that because that will turn it green and it will desaturate it in one go. So please do this exercise, and certainly send your own exercises to me. Take photos and whatever. Just and let me know how you felt about doing that exercise. I'm going to try something here with this little corner of this little page, just with regards to the earth colors idea. I've drawn a little circle here, it's a little sphere, okay. And what I'd like to do is play around with adding these three colors to another color, sienna, yellow ochre, and burnt umber, and watch how it changes that color in terms of draining out the color and desaturating it, and so on. So I'm going to apply them to this little spherical object here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with an orangey color, okay. Just so really, there's no real reason you could start with any color and then start to adjust them, but I'd like to start with this sort of color here, okay. I'm going to drop a tiny little bit of red into that, just to say, give it slightest of oranges, but that's all really, you know. And then I'm going to play around with adding these other colors. So I'm going to begin first of all with dropping a little top right with a blob of this color here. I'm just going to move the light slightly so you can see that a wee bit better. Hopefully that's a bit clearer. And what I'm going to do now into this, just while I have it here, I'm going to clean the brush. I'm going to add some of my yellow ochre. So it's on the palette there. I'll drop a little bit of that on there, and then drop it in beside it. And you can see hopefully the change already beside that. So I'll blend that in a little bit. There, okay. Then what I'll do, take another little bit of the orangey sort of color I've been using here. Get that in there. And this time we'll drop in a little bit of the sienna, burnt sienna, okay. So we'll drop it in, we'll find it. Okay, get a wee bit more on there, not too much. More water. Drop it in and put it on there. You can see how that changes that segment. And again, perhaps if I just damp the brush, I can maybe blend that slightly before it gets dry. Okay, you can still see the lines on my little draw, but that's okay. Again, we'll get some of the base color in there, and this time we'll drop in our umber, okay, or burnt umber. So this is going to make a different thing, obviously. You can see that there. And just drop that around the edge of that, like that. And again, maybe just take and try and soften that out a bit there with the big brush. So what I've done there is just to let you see, you know, and I haven't overladen it with mixing, but the transition that we can create with those earth colors, that, you know, when we apply them, and we can increase them. Okay, I can take that umber a little bit more there, and while that's wet, drop that in, and you can see as it goes to that cooler brown, the earth color, we create some sense of shadow. Now the thing is, because we've used this orange color in all of the elements of it, it maintains that warmth, but at the same time there is that subtlety of change of saturation, if you like. So it's one way of adjusting color using those three earth colors here that I've written. But keep in mind that it's only one way. It's not the way on its own, because we can want and may want deeper shadows very often compared to what we have here, and we might want to cool those shadows more, so we might want to increase the volume of blues and things, so it's more subtle than this. But what we have here is a nice form which is running from light to dark, yellow through red, back round to the cooler end, beginning to, you know, dull down to the colder end of things, and consequently you have some sense of maybe 3 dimensions there. Thought you might want to see this. I've just gone back to this. I thought after that last little clip there, I thought I'll just keep painting. So what I did was added more of the orange plus burnt umber at the side there, deepened it a little bit. Then in the midsection, added another layer of the orange plus the burnt sienna in the middle, and then at the end I added a little bit more of the orange plus the yellow ochre. So it's just giving it a richer, slightly more contrast there, and I took a bit more time to blend it also, and maybe you can get some sense of what's going on there. Okay, so these are the earth colors we worked with a moment ago, our sienna, our ochre, and our burnt umber, in order to desaturate and vary. What I want to do now is show you how to mix earth or neutral colors, because sometimes earth is a dangerous term to use because it tends to suggest browns, and sometimes not always a brown that we're working with, so we'll call them neutral colors as much as possible. What I want to do is create these colors from secondary colors. So what I mean is, if I could just reach over here a second, obviously we know that secondary colors, when we mix the primary colors, we get secondary colors. So that's green, and it's orange, and it's violet, purple, whatever. So that's the colors I'm going to use for these combinations, and we'll see what happens. So the first combination of those secondaries, of course, would be, or will be, violet and orange. So we'll do that first. I have made a violet. I'm going to use the orange and the green from the palette. I'm not going to mix them, just really for convenience, because we're not achieving anything necessarily by doing that. I have mixed the violet up because the violet on my palette is very, very reddish, and I wanted something more neutral. So I don't know if you can possibly see, probably here clunking there, the violet on the palette there that I made up, which is slightly more bluish, you know. Anyway, let's put a little of that on. So we've got this violet made up with crimson and ultramarine. And what I'm going to do is add orange to that. So I'll drop in some orange off the palette. Give it a good mix around. And I'm going to put it down here. You can see that. And it should dry back a wee bit more clearly. While we're doing that, I'm going to stick with the orange because orange is going to be in the next combination. So I'm going to get some orange off the palette onto my little tray here. Very vibrant orange. And in this case, I'm going to add green to it. I'm going to use Viridian green as it happens because it's a fairly mid green but very vibrant sort of a green. But again, little by little. Put a little bit more in there maybe overdid the green, so compromise back with the orange. What we're looking for is a neutral muddy color here, you know. So there we are. We're getting something like that there. I'll put that in beside that one. Again, let that dry. And now we move on to violet again. And get the violet that I had on my palette mopped over here. Much as I might as well use it all up because it should be the last combination of the three. And into the violet we're going to put green. So rinse up the brush, get a little bit of our Viridian there and add it in. Maybe a tiny tad more. Mix it in. And you can see them changing as I mix them, hopefully in palette, but this makes more sense when you see them here. And this is what we get on that one. And you can see the resulting earth neutral colors that we're getting here. There is the first one, which is violet, purple and orange together. Second one is green and orange together. Third one is violet and green together. And it makes sense if you look at that, how they vary, because the first one, violet and orange both have red in them. So therefore it's going to be a reddish earth. Green and orange both have yellow in there. So the result is a yellowish earth neutral color. And of course violet and green both have blue in them. And the result is this nice bluish greyish color. So there is a different set of neutrals. And you can see them compared to the earths that I used directly from the palette the last part of the video. And you can see the difference in them. And generally speaking, these neutrals are that wee bit more subdued. Even though they're called earth colors, they tend to have a vibrancy about them. And that's why, if you looked at the little exercise we did, you know, that whilst they've got more desaturated things going on in the shadows, you know, compared to the light side, when we mix them all together here, there's still a certain vibrancy in there, you know. So that's why sometimes these mixtures are more accurate in terms of, can be more accurate in terms of neutralizing other colors. So we're going to use these in a moment to do exactly that. What I want to do here is now, I printed off this little image of an orange, and what I did is sampled colors, 4 colors from it. And you can see, you know, the range, if I can get a little bit closer there. The top left is that very rich kind of orange. Then a lot of the mid area is this ever so slightly redder orange. Then when we go into the shadow area here, we go to this much more neutral color. It still has a reddiness perhaps about it, but certainly very neutral. And then at the very edge, in the deepest of shadows, we go into what, you know, appears to be much more of a cooler and a grayer tone at that very extreme edge. So it seems that when we analyze our subject, it's moving from that rich orange, yellowish orange almost, to redder and then to bluer. So we're moving the temperature slowly that way from yellow, or rather orange, across the blue end of things. So what I'm going to do is take the colors what we've got here, and also just beginning with orange as our base color. So I'm just taking, just clean the brush up a wee bit here. I'm just taking an orange to begin with. And we'll talk about this again later actually, but you know, the business of what's called local color, but that's for maybe another time. So if I take the orange here and look at the first color, obviously we know it's more yellow, and it's not particularly desaturated. So be careful. We don't need to use these at the moment. But what we do maybe want to do is, you know, increase the yellow content a little bit. So I'll put a little bit of yellow in there and bring that up, so you can see what's happening there. Okay, we're getting a brighter, more vibrant color. You can see it beside there, it's quite close. So I'm going to put that in. I haven't even drawn an actual orange here. I'm going to put that in as a little corner piece there. Okay, move the light slightly, that's a little bit better. And we'll take a little sample from our next color, which second one is, which is clearly very orange. Okay, so I'm just doing that right now. I'm getting some more pure orange, and maybe just touch the bottom of that to see, because we might actually be really quite close. But you can see that it needs reddened slightly, and look at it in comparison to that orange. Isn't it slightly desaturated? It's not absolutely pure color, really. So maybe what we do is use our red earth that we made up to do two of those things. So we'll add a little bit in, not too much. I'm going to put another wee bit beside that. You see how that has taken that color closer to our target color. You see that? I'll cover that a wee bit up. So maybe I'm going to chance a little bit more, and I'm going to put that in beside that. So I'm going to put this area in. I'm only using 4 colors really, but and pretend this little orange that I'm making up here. Put that in there. Okay. Mid sort of area up around here, and then we'll have a look at the next section here, and this is where it's interesting, because this is where it really does go drain out quite a bit. So what we need to do here is take quite a bit of our neutral red earth into that mix. So we just go ahead and put it in what remained of that there, and let's put it down beside there, and you can see that we're getting there. See if I drop that in a wee bit darker. So that's reasonably good. I'm going to put some more of that in actually, because it is quite a neutral color. And you know, I might be using a little more water than needs be, therefore what we're getting is a lighter tone, because obviously watercolor is so transparent. But just put that in there as another section, if you like. And then what can be interesting is this last one, where it's going even that bit cooler, if you like, you know. So I just want to bring that up there. It's just annoying me a wee bit, even though it's only So this time, let's see what happens if we cool it. We'll take the color we've already made, because we're at that point there, and let's push it further. But this time, cooling it down with our slightly bluish earth, all right? So we'll drop down, and you can see the difference already. Let's put it beside there. Do you see how that becomes much more, it's a bit messy, but you can see how that compared to the previous one. I actually might put a wee bit more in, to be honest. So the ready-made neutral color that I made can then drop in to, you know, this darkest area here that we had up around the edges of the thing. I'll just set that down there so you can see. Drop that in, you know. And what I hope you see, and I haven't blended these together or whatever, because it is to do with sampling the colors at the minute. But hopefully what you see is some idea that we're using those ready-made, the ones we made up, neutral colors to create the subtleties, you see, of these tones here, and that tone there, and so on. There it is there. And then this very deep one over here. So we can create, you see, that nice sense of light and shade. As I say, you know, could wash this together. It'll probably go a lot lighter if I did this, so you know, it's probably not worth doing. But what I'm saying is we can create a nice palette of colour to do with light and shade around an object like an orange, and we can create those shadows with these secondary based neutral colours. Hi everybody. Just to sum this up, because this particular little lesson exercise, there's a lot in it, I understand, but basically the theme of what I'm trying to tell you is that there are ways that we can control color. Now we've looked at those in the previous videos, step by step, controlling the brightness, controlling the temperature, controlling the saturation, one step at a time, which is perfectly fine. But what I'm saying is there are other ways that you can have prepared, pre-arranged colors on your palette ready to use as to dip in to get a desaturation and things done quicker without many steps. So one, just to refresh your memory, is to use earth colors, or brown is not a word I like to use, but earth colors we will use in this case, such as our burnt sienna, yellow ochre, and burnt umber in the case here. It'll show better on the actual video later on when you're watching this, obviously. But that's one option. The other option that I showed you is making neutral colors using secondary colors, and there we are. There again, light's not great, but you'll see them. Violet plus green gives you that bluish earth. Yellow plus or green plus orange will give you that slightly yellowish tint, of course. And violet plus orange will give you a slightly redder neutral tone. And if you have those sitting around in your palette or something like those, you can also use those to create desaturate and change temperature kind of at the same time. These probably are more accurate than the use of the ready-made earths. But to be honest, if you were out and about in the landscape and you were painting and you just wanted something quickly, then if they're on your palette, there's no mixing involved. You go with these and maybe just tweak them a wee bit. So see the use of those. What I would like you to do now is try those exercises, particularly the last couple where we took the orange form and matched those colors using those methods that I've shown you, and also using the ready-made earths, the ochre and the sienna and the umber, and just see what that does to color, and make a note. I mean, make a note maybe on these like I've done here below them, and show me what you got, and tell me please what you found difficult, because that's how I can give you some feedback and whatever. So good luck with that, and hopefully you find this one useful and interesting.